Welcome to the first webinar of our Hazardous Material Outreach, Transport Outreach Summer Webinar Series. My name is Kelsey Prihota, and I am the Great Lakes Transportation Extension Educator with Minnesota Sea Grant. Minnesota Sea Grant is the lead organization for the Hazardous Material Transport Outreach Network, or HazMaTON. Our network is a binational collaborative of specialists from the Great Lakes, Lake Champlain, Hudson River, and St. Lawrence River regions, focused on reducing risks associated with multiple modes of oil and other hazardous material transportation. The collaborative is committed to the dissemination of accurate, neutral, and data-driven information through education, outreach, and relationship building in order to improve public safety, the region's economy, and environmental stewardship of our water resources. To that end, we are very pleased to bring you the first webinar of our 2023 Summer Webinar Series. These webinars will be taking place monthly through September. Today's webinar is the U.S. Coast Guard Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise, and it will describe the formation and history of the Center of Expertise, the center's work since its official opening in August of 2022, and the center staff and collaborative partnerships. This summer, we will bring you webinars on topics such as marine firefighting, the role of a federal on-scene coordinator, and oil behavior in freshwater. And you can register for multiple webinars within this series at one time. More information and registration is available on the HazMaTON webinar webpage, which I believe Geneva shared in the chat. Before we get started, I have just a few logistics to share. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording with closed captions will be made publicly available on Minnesota Sea Grant's YouTube channel, as well as the Hazardous Material Outreach Network's webinar website. We invite you to submit questions, comments, technical challenges at any time via the question and answer box in your Zoom toolbar. It's right at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And audience members, if they so choose, can upvote questions that they are interested in having answered live. And we'll be collecting all of the questions for a Q&A session that will happen at the end of the presentation. Okay, so with that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Lieutenant Junior Grade Allison Gates is the Assistant Chief at the U.S. Coast Guard Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise. She works out of the Ann Arbor, Michigan office at NOAA's Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory. Allie is a native of Kansas City, Missouri, and a 2020 graduate from the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, earning a Bachelor of Science degree in Marine and Environmental Sciences. As her capstone, she worked with the U.S. Coast Guard's Research and Development Center on the modernization of the U.S. Coast Guard air monitoring response for in situ burning operations, with special monitoring of applied response techniques or SMART protocol compliance. Allie is excited to continue her career with the Great Lakes Center of Expertise to advance freshwater oil spill research and response capabilities. With that, Allie, you can go ahead and share your screen and start your presentation.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Perfect. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Kelsey, for inviting me to talk today. I know our unit is very excited to kind of publicize what work we are doing. And I also have two of our staff today on the webinar that if any questions are asked that I may not be able to answer, they will be able to answer them in the chat when that time comes. But to start off, we are the U.S. Coast Guard Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise. And our purpose is to operationalize innovative ideas that improve freshwater and Arctic oil spill responses. I would like to add that we are non-operational, so we do not go out and we are not the actual pollution responders. If you do see us on a spill, it is specifically for research. So that is part of the legislative mandate, is to only conduct research for the purposes of oil spill response. So just a little bit of our history. It came into fruition in the Coast Guard Reauthorization Act of 2018. So that was the direct establishment of the Great Lakes. It was originally the Great Lakes National Center of Expertise for Oil Spill Preparedness and Response, but now it is the Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise. So as you see on the right side of the screen, section 807 kind of outlines what our functions are, what the primary like locations, why they wanted them in the specific locations that they are in. And then you can see that this was a huge lead from Senator Peters, who was able to secure $4.5 million for the Center of Expertise. So we are fully staffed currently for active duty. So there are 4 of us, and then we have 3 civilian members that have been added this spring. And we still have 1 vacant position for GS-12s that we are looking to fill soon. But just to go into more of the functions, we are supposed to monitor and assess the current state of knowledge regarding freshwater oil spill response technologies and the behaviors and effects of oil spills in the Great Lakes. So when we were first started, we did have a workshop here at GLERL, which I'll go more into later in the presentation, to just kind of get more of an idea of what research has already been funded and what needs to be looked into for gaps in the Great Lakes. And then we are also conducting research, developing, testing, and evaluating different freshwater oil spill response equipment, technologies, and techniques that may already be in place and what the Coast Guard or other agencies may want to use in the future. And then a huge part of our mandate is to educate and train federal, state, and local first responders, whether that's ICS, the Incident Command System structure, whether it's fire departments, police departments, state departments that want to educate their teams. So if there is a response, we can all work collectively with common terminology and just greater open that collaborative workforce for an oil spill response. We do have 2 site locations. I am at GLERL in Ann Arbor, and then 4 of our members are up at Lake Superior State University up in Sault Ste. Marie. And as you can see, there's little explanations on why each location was chosen. So Lake Superior State University has a great aquatic research laboratory. It is open to the public, so if you're ever in Sault Ste. Marie, it is a phenomenal building. It's on the St. Mary's River, and it has critical crude oil transportation infrastructure that connects the Great Lakes. And then here at GLERL, NOAA's Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory, we have NOAA's National Ocean Service, Marine Sanctuary Program, Great Lakes Regional Collaboration Team, Sea Grant, International Association for Great Lakes Research. So we are hosted with many of NOAA's key partners, which is great to have because we can collaborate on our research together to not necessarily duplicate research that has already been done. And SIGLR is also part of GLERL. So it's a cooperative institute for Great Lakes research. They have 10 universities, 2 NGOs, and 3 businesses. And the lead collaborator for SIGLR is University of Michigan. For just a little bit about the staff that we have 3 up in Sault Ste. Marie currently. So Lieutenant Commander Kit Pace is our supervisor. He has 2 master's degrees, 1 in global affairs and 1 in environmental policy and management. He was the chief of response in Savannah, Georgia for the past couple of years, directing all ports, waterways, and coastal security and environmental response missions. We have Chief Warrant Officer Clifton Hendry, who is our technical advisor. He is originally from Utah, and he spent the past 18 years in the Coast Guard dealing with disaster and environmental response experiences. So he's been dealing with oil spill responses, hurricane responses, and some prevention for responses as well. And then we have Dr. Allison Snyder, who is one of our GS 12 research scientists. She has a BS in natural research biology from Central Michigan University, and she also completed her PhD at Louisiana State University. And she worked on her dissertation exploring the chronic effects of Deepwater Horizon oil contamination in the salt marsh food web. In Ann Arbor, we are fully staffed here. So we have Dr. Sarah Bowman, who is our senior research scientist. She has a PhD in psychology or in toxicology from the Ohio State University and wetland ecology master's degree from the University of Georgia. She just came from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where she served as the Midwest Regional Coordinator for Spill Response and Natural Resource Damage Assessment and Restoration. Then we have Dr. Matt Alloy, who is also a research scientist. He is an ecotoxicologist with specialization in photo-induced oil toxicity. He earned his PhD from the University of North Texas with a dissertation on the phototoxicity of oil from the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And then we also have Wine One Miranda Brudzinski, who is our administrative assistant. She is originally from Michigan and has been stationed in Connecticut, Florida, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, Ohio, and she is a strong assist in our administrative work as well as our travel coordination. So a little bit about our collaboration. So with us focusing on operationalizing our research and some of our strategic project planning, we do a lot of our work with NOAA, Office of Response and Restoration, GLURL and SIGLR, as well as ICOPAR, which is the Interagency Coordinating Committee on Oil Pollution Research. And that is very heavily focused with the Coast Guard and other agencies. We also have the NOAA Sea Grant collaboration, HazMaTON, and then a couple of Coast Guard entities like the District 9, which is in Cleveland, Ohio. They coordinate a lot of the work we do since their area of responsibility is the Great Lakes, as well as the Coast Guard Academy. We have internships that we have started this summer, actually. We have asked cadets if they would be interested in doing some research with us. So we actually have one intern at Lake Superior State University right now that is spending 5 weeks with us, experimenting on sediment samples from multiple areas of Lake Superior and Lake Huron's beaches. And using these sediment samples, she is exposing them to MC20 oil and then examining the bacteria to see which can biodegrade the oil. So she has day 0 control and exposed section for each sample, and then comparing the bacteria present throughout the different stages of the experiment. And so the end goal is to see if there are bacteria that thrive or biodegrade oil, so that way in the future we can use them in oil spills to try and clean up spills in a more sustainable way. And that is just one of our partnerships that we're trying to integrate more of the Coast Guard Academy into real world scenarios. So then when they do go out in the field and you are working with them as an officer, they have more of an idea of what these things look like. We do a lot of work with the Coast Guard Research and Development Center. They do great work. And so we're trying to transition some of the work that they are doing into actually being operationalized in the Coast Guard workforce. And then we do have a lot of Canadian stakeholders doing binational work. Just a little overview of some events that we had in 2022, just to show our collaboration with different agencies. And so we had a equipment demonstration and deployment exercise in Rogers City. So Sector Sault Ste. Marie and U.S. Oil organized this event, which led to static displays and demonstrate how they would be of value during all stages of a response. And that really helped us at the beginning trying to figure out what response techniques were currently being used and how they were going to further work on this new technology. We also had a Smart Ships Coalition for the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River workshop in Houghton, Michigan. So this was a really great workshop to show the collaborative work between academic, state, federal, private, nonprofit, and international industry for autonomous vessels, technologies, and just how we can adapt the workforce that is going to be working with this technology and how to better move forward with that obstacle. We also had a stakeholder workshop that I talked about earlier, trying to figure out the gaps and opportunities for oil spill research in the Great Lakes. So we had technical presentations from government agencies, academia, that kind of just briefed us on different topics like environmental sensitivity index maps, Great Lakes operational forecast system, oil sediment interactions, the multi-partner research initiative with Canada, ROVs and UASs, which was a really great workshop for us to work together with some of the stakeholders we have in the Great Lakes. And then something that was new was we went to the christening of the Viking Octantis, which is a Norwegian Viking cruise line. And so we were able to see how they have a passenger like cruise vessel that also has various different expeditions during the cruise that leads scientific research. So it was very interesting to see the different equipment that they have and what they kind of teach people that go on these cruises. To get into some of our highlighted projects that we've been working on recently, I'll go in a little more in depth for some of them over other ones. But our first one is oil spill modeling. So that is a project that Dr. Matt Alloway is working on. So if you have any scientific questions, definitely direct them towards him. But in a general sense, it is a evaluation of NOAA for predicting trajectories in the Great Lakes. So the current modeling effort focuses on adapting no modeling environment from marine oil spill movement prediction to become operational in the Great Lakes. And with that, it's validation of the predictions in Lake Erie to identify the physical areas and times of year where predictions would require further refinement and development, as well as development of oil and ice models that are constrained by the hydrogeography of the Great Lakes. So, I mean, we know that Great Lakes has ice formation and the movement and how the different weather elements can affect ice. And so we're trying to break down those ice models to see whether or not how accurate they are. So we also have ROV and UAS purchases. So we purchased some UASs and ROVs for our Coast Guard District 9. And that helps the District Response Advisory Team work on operationalizing the use of UASs in the Coast Guard. So they have brought equipment to vessel groundings, vessel fires, sunken vessels, harbor spills, and hurricane responses, just to see what data they can use and figuring out which drone or ROV may be the best in each of these scenarios. For the Great Lakes ESI maps, we were able to help fund the Great Lakes Environmental Sensitivity Index maps for Lake Erie. I know that NOAA ORNR is constantly trying to update these maps for oil spill responses because they are very important to see what could be harmful to the environment. We have a Great Lakes spill response capability and gap analysis that is currently going on right now to be able to tell us different capabilities and the capacity of techniques and tactics that are in the Great Lakes. So then that can help us promote our research in different directions to reduce the health, environmental, and economic risks. The detection of oil and ice with unmanned systems is heavily led by NOAA R&R. So they conducted field trials with UAS in an area with complicating elements of ice-infested freshwater environment. And that is helping the Coast Guard create protocols for flying and characterizing ice coverage in the field. So that would include a field guide that we also are currently working on. And I'll go into a little bit more detail with this project because we did have an experiment in March on Coast Guard Cutter Spar, as well as up at Lake Superior State. So I'll have that further in the slide. Spills of opportunity, they're currently creating criteria for various technologies, and they want to develop a framework for selecting and updating a list of potential spills of opportunity that could allow for researchers, agencies to deploy rapidly to enhance our overall ability to support cleanup assessments and minimize ecological harm. And then proof of concept, we're doing Polaris oil spill detection systems. We are working on conducting a literature and market research of some of the similar technologies to pods to try to figure out how we can measure real-time autonomous operation. So Pods is very important to us because as of right now, it can detect oil at night. And that is something that we want to focus on moving forward to see what type of sensors would be able to do that in different conditions, whether it's ice coverage, a storm, cloud coverage, light, things like that, that could impact the sensors. So to go more into oil detection within ice. So we had Coast Guard Cutter Spar, which was phase 1 at the beginning of March. So we had several people from Coast Guard headquarters, the COE team, Coast Guard District 9. We also had NOAA's Pryor, SSC, Rachel Pryor there, Dr. Elisa DePinto, James Kessler, Mike Worrell, Oscar Garcia, and Deanna Garcia from Water Mapping. And they were very helpful in trying to create an orthomosaic as we were flying the drones. So during a favorable weather window, Water Mapping flew several missions, and they used LiDAR, thermal, and RGB at a series of heights of 100, 200, and 400 feet elevations in combination. So one thing we wanted to do was, as the Coast Guard cutter was breaking ice, was trying to figure out what would the drone cameras and sensors be able to detect. Now, I will say that there was no oil put into the water. I just want to make sure that that is clear. This was just for the breaking of ice. So it was very successful. So we were able to get an orthomosaic, which you can see in the top right corner of the cutter going through the ice, which was phenomenal. We did get very good data that was delivered successfully to diver. And that is one thing that we're trying to work on, is getting data from the responders to the command post, and how easily that could be transferred, because sometimes depending on where you are, that can be a problem. Phase 2 was at Lake Superior State University, and in mid-March. And so they actually put oil in totes with various different amounts of ice. And then they wanted to use varying conditions like light, temperature, and then the ice and oil thickness variables to figure out what they could see with the oil on the water with different conditions. So they did use thermal, multispectral, and light detection and ranging sensors. And that was great. It was a great training for the Coast Guard drone operators because they were working alongside Dr. Oscar Garcia. And then the Atlantic Strike Team also made it up there to observe this series of outdoor experiments. For upcoming, we do have fiscal year 24 call for proposals. They are going to be due June 30th of 2023. And as you can see, we have 3 themes here that we are focusing on for this upcoming year of funding. So we have the freshwater oil spill preparedness, we have freshwater oil spill response, and alternative response measures application in freshwater. So we are soliciting for research opportunities. So if you are interested in submitting a proposal, please feel free to reach out to either myself or our general shared inbox, which I have at the last slide. But this is going to be a consistent requests for proposals as we go year after year, and as we kind of create our strategic plan, we'll be able to more readily define what we are looking for our research in the future. And if you are interested in submitting a proposal, this is what we have for minimum requirements. There is no page limit minimum or maximum. The only thing that we do have is that background and context should be a max of 750 words. For annual award, so $250,000 is the max, but there is an opportunity for multi-year initiatives that will just have to be explained in further detail for what you would need the cost estimate to be for each year, like what you would work on for each annual fiscal year. with that, here at the bottom, we have the general shared inbox that we have at the Great Lakes Center of Expertise. If you have any questions, if you have any suggestions for further research or different groups and opportunities that you may be putting on, please let us know. We love trying to attend various exercises, training opportunities, or if you're doing research yourself and you think it might be beneficial for us to come and observe so we can further our research, we would greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Allie. This has been a great presentation. So folks, we have plenty of time for questions. So just to remind you again that you can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. And for Allie, I also am able to unmute your colleagues that are on the webinar from the Great Lakes Center of Expertise. So if that would be helpful, I can definitely do that. My powers as the host.
Yes, that would definitely be beneficial because I know if there's some scientific questions, I might need some help. So
Yeah. Okay, so we have a few questions in our Q&A box right now from David Ruck. Thanks, David, for all the questions. I'm gonna, before I dive into David's questions, I'm just gonna ask you maybe to elaborate a little bit more on the Viking octantis and the work that you are doing within the scope of that cruise line. And I know NOAA also has a research relationship with Viking. And so, yeah, we're just kind of wondering, if you could elaborate a little bit on the work that you're doing, that the center is doing with Viking Cruise Lines, and whether or not the cruise participants are involved in the research in any way, and just kind of how that's working.
for sure. So with Viking Octantis, we have not started any research with the actual company and or vessel. We did board the vessel to kind of see what research they were doing. So they have a lot of geology. They have two submarines that are actually able to go under the water, and they can take guests with them when they go. They have some military grade boats, like small boats, that when the researchers want to go and do various research on different islands, whether it's water sampling, they will actually bring, they'll open up a sign up for passengers that can go with them and observe the research that they're doing, which I think is awesome, that they're able to include some of the passengers that are interested in this stuff. And they have webinars at night, so they'll have different researchers that'll explain the research they're doing or what they're interested in. And so we really just went there to figure out if another way for us to get to know people, if that would be an opportunity for us to have a Coast Guard unit go and kind of deliver a webinar series, I would say, for explaining to people what is the Coast Guard, what work do we do, and things of that nature.
Very, very cool. Okay. Thank you for that. And so you mentioned in your presentation some of the partnerships and Canadian stakeholders being some of the partnerships that you have. And we have a question about whether any work has been done with Canada using the experimental lakes site to test with actual oil to prove or validate your remote sensing research.
That's a great question. That is something that we have looked into, actually. We have not done anything to date, but we are looking into various different test sites throughout not only the US, but Canada and other countries that may have the opportunity to put oil into a test lake to further our research. So we are looking for more information on that. If anyone in the call does have recommendations for test lakes or different sites, like wave tanks, things like that. I know we have OMSED and Krell and things like that, but that would be awesome.
Okay, so you had one of the projects that you mentioned the center is working on right now is a Great Lakes spill response capability and gap analysis, among many other projects that you mentioned. I'm wondering, and you also had mentioned that, the center's scope is not being actively deployed when a response happens, but the research and testing and development that goes into response technologies and equipment and detection. So with that, we have a question about how Indigenous perspectives are being included in the work that the center is doing. And I was wondering, as like a second part to that, if like the response capability and gap analysis, if that's something that is part of that project.
Yeah, so for the gaps analysis, they are focusing on in what areas of the Great Lakes do we have different response equipment, and where is it actually set up, as well as are there different areas of the Great Lakes that need more training, need more, I guess, not necessarily technology, but our actual response equipment, is that in an area where it's very remote. We're doing a lot of drone stuff right now, but not every town, city, or like tribal areas have capabilities of using a drone when there is an oil spill. So that is one thing that it is focusing on, is trying to figure out how we can get these things to those types of areas. And then up in Sault Ste. Marie, that office is very focused on tribes, because Sector Sault Ste. Marie has a lot of collaboration with them, and making sure that their perspectives and what their priorities are also aligning with the things that the Coast Guard is doing.
Okay. And aside from like that particular project of the gap analysis, and thanks for expanding on that a little bit, are there any other ways that you are thinking about, the center is thinking about including Indigenous perspectives?
Yeah, so as we're going to different workshops and conferences, we're meeting more and more perspectives that we may not have had prior to starting up this unit. So that's really what we're focusing on right now, is trying to divide amongst ourselves to kind of work with tribes, different universities, different aspects that we may not be thinking of currently at this time. So we're figuring that out now, to figure out how we can best reach everyone. Well, as many people as possible. I know we're not going to reach everyone, but as many people as we can in the Great Lakes.
All right, great. Okay, so a question about the request for proposals that you mentioned at the end of your presentation. Do you have a time frame for when the funds from that proposal will be released or available?
Okay, yeah. So funds for fiscal year 24. We normally, the first month or two after our fiscal year, which our fiscal year starts in October. So we will normally have funding near the winter months, winter to spring months.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Okay, we have a question about whether or not there are any plans to develop an oil spill drill, regardless of industry, where a combination of OSROs, first responders, and U.S. Coast Guard can work together on how a response might go.
Right. Okay. So the Coast Guard has an incident management advisory team. So normally during those, they'll have Coast Guard members. Sometimes they'll have OSROs that are working together to figure out how the best way to follow through with an oil spill. So if there is a specific OSRO agency, university that is looking to be involved in a spill drill, please reach out to us, and we'll try to coordinate you with with proximity to where they may be located. But yes, those are out there.
All right, great. Thank you. Um, and speaking of partnerships and expanding networks, Ed Bailey mentions that the 2023 Smart Ships Coalition meeting is being held in conjunction with Lakebed 2030 Conference, Traverse City, Michigan, September 19th through the 22nd. And to please consider attending and presenting your work at the events. So we have a question about another question going back to Viking Octantis. You may or may not know the answer to this question. That's okay. The question is that this person's understanding is that the Jones Act limits the activity that Viking Cruise Line can accommodate. I'm not sure if you learned about any of that when you visited them, but has this been the case, and could their participation or actions be different, I guess, within the scope of research that the center may be doing with them in the future? Are U.S. flagged vessels willing to fill the gaps that Viking seems that Viking may or may not be able to accommodate?
Right. I wish I had an answer to that question, but I do not.
All right. And then I am going to be putting you in contact with David Ruck, who would like some your contact information. So I will introduce the two of you after the webinar.
Perfect.
All right. That was the end of our questions in the Q&A box, and I just want to make sure that there are no additional questions that the audience may have before I do my wrap up. So I'm going to give it like 30 seconds. And maybe in that 30 seconds, I will ask you my question, which is how you got interested in the area of oil spill response, oil spill response technology, how you got kind of interested in that and started.
Okay. So my senior year at the Coast Guard Academy, I really wanted to do a research project. So I worked with the Research and Development Center that was right down the road, and they were doing work with in situ burns and air monitoring. And I didn't really know that there was a whole nother world of the Coast Guard of marine environmental response. So once I found that out, I went to a Coast Guard cutter for my first tour down in Florida. And even as I was down there, I was super interested in how like the environment was impacted by like oil spills and things like that. So when this opportunity came up to be part of this unit, there was no hesitation.
All right. Thank you. One more question. This is coming from David Ruck as well. So David's wondering if the center has any big activities this summer, notable research planned, and because David would potentially like to participate as media. So so yeah, two-part, I guess, question.
Yeah, so we are doing a couple of things this summer. We're currently wrapping up some of our fiscal year 23 projects. So we're going to be working a lot with NOAA, ORNR again. And so there will definitely be some experiments and different events that haven't necessarily been scheduled yet, but they will be soon. So please feel free to reach out so we can get connected and get you to some of these experiments and things that we have going on.
Great. Yeah. And I can make that introduction. Okay. I think that's the end of our questions. So thank you. Thank you so much. Again, Lieutenant Junior Grade Allison Gates, our presenter today, for your great presentation and being so gracious with your time and answering all these questions.